Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Wednesday, the 1st of April, April Fool's Day, is coming to you from London. And you would think it was a bit of an April Fool with crude oil prices falling $20 after Trump said that he might just walk away from the Middle East war. And that's quite interesting that it's produced this big downside target. And I always say that this target is not built based on trading. This is just based on a re-rating of the market. Straight away the price fell. So I just discount this target a little bit more than I would one that's generated. And similarly, this upside target had a bit of a gap up as well. So we are in this sort of really tricky place in terms of the 60-minute chart and what's going on with crude oil. The more important thing is the trading range, the levels at which traders bought and sold. And we saw 120, it was just shy of 120, 119.50 was a level yesterday that couldn't be breached. And that's where we hit resistance. And we needed to break and hold that level really for that to be a level at which people wouldn't sell. That didn't happen, so that resistance at 120 is clearly confirmed. So a break above 120 would be very bullish indeed. No signs of that happening in the short term. And a break below this sort of 97 level, that's the level that's been tested a few times more recently, would be bearish. And then I would start to consider that target a bit more seriously. But then you have to look at 85 as the next level. And this target, of course, is to 80. So at the moment, that's the picture on Brent crude. We still do have this big upside target hanging over us. That would only be deactivated with a move back below 70. But the reality is we are just starting to see this 100 levels becoming really critical for crude oil. And we look at WTI, which is the US benchmark. This has been a little bit less volatile, but again, we're seeing downside target given here this morning. And we went out as bearish in a report this morning, and the same for European gas and power products. So we cover that every morning in our morning report. But let's look at what's going on in the markets. So all the rises you've seen recently starting to unwind. So we see here the dollar couldn't quite break that resistance level, 155. We're back below 100 on the dollar index and back into bearish territory on the short-term chart. So interestingly, we are still very much in this dollar range. And for the moment, the dollar is medium to long-term neutral, well, medium-term neutral. And if I look at the longer-term trend, we are bearish here. That's a little bit more bearish. So that's just what's happened in terms of the currency. Bitcoin, we've talked about, still has these downside targets hanging over. The big thing was the move in the markets yesterday. We saw a big move in the NASDAQ. That's a big counter-trend move. It does not change the picture. So it's always worth remembering that the short-term moves will change the short-term picture, but the short-term moves will not necessarily change the medium-term picture unless you're breaking critical levels of support or resistance. So this target still hangs over the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is still in bearish territory, as is the S&P. Had a big day yesterday, big counter trend move, but we are still bearish below the cloud. And this is true of most markets. The UK market actually managing to bounce on the cloud, is bearing up better than most. Does have two big oil majors, BP and Shell, which have high weightings in the index, which is improving matters. We're seeing relief in the DAX in Germany. That's up 2.5% this morning. But again, this is below the cloud and it's a relief rally. What was support is potentially becoming resistance. So we do need to take that into account. We saw, of course, markets in Asia bouncing strongly. Doesn't change the picture at all in the Sensex and the Aussie market. I was on the phone to Australia this morning. Situation there really challenging with fuel. There are some sign there's some support. Gold, we're seeing a continuing pattern of rising there, upside targets you can see there. Just follow the train tracks on gold. That you can't ignore that on the short-term chart. The medium-term picture is a bit harder to read. The downside targets were met there, so that's quite interesting that we're seeing that on gold. But the reality is we have to make new highs really. Looking at the bond markets, just quickly, we saw some relief in bonds, but Japan is still a big issue. The bond yield moves in Japan. US 10-year yields still have this upside target despite the relief yesterday, and that will only change with a move back below the levels that we saw at the beginning of March. So the targets are still in place. We can't ignore the fact we have these upside targets for bond markets. So the respite is temporary at the moment. You see there on the German bond yield, really quite clear cut. So we've seen a bit of a counter trend move, and we saw this certainly on the tech majors yesterday. If we look at stocks like Tesla, 4.6%, but has still moved to the targets. 3 downside targets there. There's one hiding in there, have been met. And so you can't ignore the fact that's bearish confirmation, remember. What you expect to happen is a move to the upside and then another sell-off generating a new downside target. That will show in the 60-minute chart, and we do still have downside targets hanging over us on the 60-minute chart. So really quite key there. Looking at the Dow 30, we saw some very big moves yesterday. Caterpillar recovering sharply. It's been above its trend. You'll remember that when I did the trend analysis, it was one of the top stocks there. Nvidia bounced. That 170 level on Nvidia was really critical, remember. We see here that we've bounced on 164. We still have the downside targets hanging over us. It doesn't change the picture. We're back above 170. But the fact that we closed below 170 and we've breached that level, we have made 6-month lows, and we still do have 3 downside targets. So the picture is still one of below the cloud with downside targets. If you want, you can go to the short-term chart and you can see that relief rally there. The risk is with every rally we've seen in a downtrend, that generates a new downside target. So you do have to watch that. We're looking at some other stocks here. Boeing, we're up 5%, doesn't change the picture. Goldman up 4.75. That is a little bit more interesting in that the trend is rolling over. A lot of good stocks still doing that. Microsoft has had a torrid 6 months, really. Looking at the move from 550 all the way to 350, back to support levels. But again, it would be a brave person buying Microsoft. And even if we look at the long-term chart, that has broken the cloud as well. So good companies. Apple's 50 years old today, and we're seeing the long-term trend is bullish. But you can see on the weekly chart some bearish, lower high. Watching out for a lower low there. That's going to be really significant, and that's what we have to watch for. So it'd be very interesting to see today to see what happens. The futures are higher by a further 1%. Euphoria returning to markets. A lot of people being tempted to buy the dip, remembering that buy the dip works in uptrends, and in downtrends it sell the recovery. So it's going to be interesting. The picture for the medium term is still bearish on the charts. There might be some short-term opportunities. You can't buck those longer-term trends. That's it for today. Have a happy time. Until tomorrow. Bye for now.